Good evening. How are you? My name is Jelani Cobb. If you're in the back, we would encourage you to kind of find your way to your seat. We're about to start with the films. My name is Jelani Cobb, and I'm the Dean of the Journalism School here. I am very happy to be able to welcome you here for this very important film. I want to thank everyone at Frontline who made this screening possible, particularly Rainey Aronson, who's in the back of the room, who we've had I personally had the pleasure of working with on several films. And just the conversations around this film before I'd seen it really kind of emphasized the importance of it and highlighted to me the significance of the old cliche that, as journalists, we hold a mirror to society. And this film is really a distillation of that. It's, as you'll see, sparse, almost spare in depicting with kind of brutal realism what exactly is happening in Ukraine. And what specifically happened at this particular point in time in Mariupol. And so it really is exemplary in terms of what it is that we're called to do and our highest responsibility as journalists. I was talking to a reporter from The Spectator, which is, for our visitors, that is Columbia's student newspaper. I was talking to a reporter from The Spectator this morning who wanted to know why it was important. He said, why is it important that people are reporting from war zones? And he was talking about the journalists who've died in Gaza and Israel, but why do people do this? Was his question. And I said that war is the most grave of human undertakings. And if we take it seriously, this idea that journalists give information. Our job is to give people the information they need to make decisions about their lives. There is no more serious circumstance in which people need information than war. And so much so that we recognize the need of the world to be informed to be more important than our own lives. And this film, I think, represents that kind of commitment. So I will say we will have a film, Sunflower Field, which Paulina Bucha her film Sunflower Field will show as a 5-minute film, which will be followed by 20 Days in Mariupol. There will not be anything in between, so you'll see the two films in succession. And then following that, my colleague Azmat Khan will come up and introduce the panel, which will be Michelle Meisner, who is a producer for this film, Rainey Aronson, June Cross, and who am I leaving out? Oh, Paulina also, thank you. So I'm sorry, Paulina, my apologies. So I think it's Venezia. Is that, my apologies in Russian? I shouldn't say Russian. That's not the language I want to use here. So that's it. And we'll begin with the screenings now. Thank you.
Thank you all for being here tonight. My name is Azmat Khan, and I'm the director of the Simon and June Lee Center for Global Journalism here at the Journalism School, which, along with the DART Center for Journalism and Trauma and the PBS series Frontline, are co-hosting tonight's event. In so many ways, 20 Days in Mariupol is a testament to the power that great conflict reporting that bears witness can have. Despite the risks, Associated Press journalists stayed in besieged Mariupol after Russia's invasion in the service of the truth, exposing atrocities, the bombings of hospitals, maternity wards, the shellings of homes, dwindling electricity and medicine, disinformation, and efforts to discredit the truth. Across the world right now, the public is indebted to journalists who risk their lives in the service of that mission. Tonight, we're so fortunate to have many of those who helped make this film here with us in person tonight, and I'd like to introduce each of them. I'll start with Rainey Aronson-Rath, the editor-in-chief and executive producer of the flagship PBS series Frontline. She oversees Frontline's acclaimed investigative reporting on air and online, and directs the series' editorial vision, executive producing more than 20 documentary films each year. She's also a leading voice on transparency and the future of journalism. At a time when broad skepticism of the news media has reached new highs, she's cemented Frontline's reputation as a source of trustworthy and consistent investigative journalism. Frontline has won every major award in broadcast journalism. I would name them, but then we wouldn't start this on time. It would take far too long, so let me just add this. As a 20-something researcher back in my Frontline days can attest, I can tell you that Rainey Aronson-Rath is a wonderful mentor to aspiring investigative journalists. Tonight we also have Michelle Meisner, senior documentary editor and producer at Frontline. She was the producer and editor of this film, which is her first feature-length film. Meisner's work for Frontline has been recognized by the Peabodys, the World Press Photo, the DuPont Columbia Awards, and South by Southwest. Select titles as producer and editor include Life in Baghdad and Inside Yemen, and The Last Call. In addition to films, Meisner has produced several acclaimed interactive documentaries, including Inheritance, The Last Generation, and Unresolved. We're also joined by Polina Buchak, an award-winning New York-based filmmaker. Born in Ukraine and raised in Nigeria, Buchak focuses on diverse and inclusive storytelling by blending new technologies into traditional mediums. Most recently, she directed the film that you watched before 20 Days in Mariupol, Sunflower Field, an animation exploring how the child's psyche is impacted during war. It won Best Short Animation at Woodstock Film Festival, as well as the Audience Award at the National Film Festival for Talented Youth. Buchak is an active volunteer for Razom for Ukraine, a New York City-based nonprofit creating content to raise funds for humanitarian aid for Ukraine, as well as leading their film programming. And lastly, we have June Cross. She's both a friendly professor and she is the Fred W. Friendly Professor, I shouldn't tell jokes, of Media and Society here at the Journalism School and director of the Documentary Journalism Program, and she'll be moderating this evening. She's the winner of the DuPont Columbia Journalism Award, a National Emmy, and a 2021 Peabody Award, and her career has highlighted stories of the dispossessed and the intersection of race, politics, and public health. Please welcome our distinguished panelists. Thank you for being here.
It's still tough. War does not begin with an explosion, but with silence. I wonder if we could go down the line and maybe start with you, Polina, as our Ukrainian on this panel. What does that line mean to you? I'd like each of you to answer. What did that line mean to you within the context of this film? That first opening line.
Oh, there's
on.
Yeah, sorry. Could you repeat? Give me
Yeah.
the line one more time.
War doesn't start with an explosion, but with silence. Did I get that right? Okay. All right.
Good job. Let's start with explosion. I feel like I've heard that line so many times at this point, but I'm gonna need to 1 second.
It makes me think
let
of,
the other-
actually, it's very poignant from a story you told me earlier tonight, which I hope it's okay if I mention. So in the days leading up to the full-scale invasion, you had a dream.
Yeah.
I expect in the silence of, at some point.
Yeah. I mean. Sorry, I have to reflect a little bit on that line. But
So I'll start. And Mstyslav Chernov sends his regards. He wishes he could be here with all of you tonight and is a really big admirer of your work, as we all are.
I mean, I'm more than honored. Mstyslav cannot be replaced, obviously, but I'm more than honored to be here with you all.
So it was interesting, the opening of the film, June, to your question. We kept asking Mstyslav, how did he know that he should go to Mariupol, right? And that was one of the animating questions of they went, they knew to go, and that's based on multiple years of him actually covering the war that preceded this. And he talked about the silence, and that's every word that you hear is Mstyslav words, right? Those are his thoughts and his inner thoughts that Michelle brilliantly was able to edit, and that was really his meditation on war. And we all thought about that deeply.
Michelle, can you talk about your editing process? Because this I don't know how many hundreds of hours of footage you must have had, but the writing is so spare, and yet the story tells itself. It's not wall-to-wall narration like some of our students like to do. The visuals actually tell the story, and his words really bring us emotionally more into the story. Can you talk about how you worked with them and worked through the footage?
Sure, yeah. So thank you all for being here tonight, first of all. I know it's a challenging film to watch, and the way that it's spoken about in the world is that it will be a difficult film to endure, and so it really means a lot to all of us, but particularly people like Mstyslav and Evgeny Maloletka and Vasilisa Stepanenko, who are the journalists on the ground with Mstyslav as he gathered this footage. So thank you for being here. And to answer your question, so the number of hours of footage was actually quite small in comparison to other films, and you would know, having made many, there were 40 hours of footage that he was able to get out of the city when he escaped, as you saw in the film. And and we had about a 6-month edit. So, and that's also fairly quick for a feature film, but we were really interested in getting something done quickly, but also giving it the time that it needed to help it be a document of history, hopefully. And so the process of working on it was, Mstyslav is a writer, actually, and that was an incredible discovery that we made, we had in the early days of working with him. It's like, oh yes, and I wrote a novel. I'm a novelist. So in the sense of having somebody who has a way with words, is a natural storyteller, thinks a lot about construction of stories and words. So he was somebody who was perfectly situated to write this story and also speak it. I don't know, I mean, you've heard him speak in this film, but also if you get an opportunity to go to something where he's speaking in a panel or a Q&A, I would encourage you to do it. He's a quite on-the-fly, natural, charismatic, just like has a, is wonderful in that way. And so as we got to know him, as we were starting to log the footage and talk about the film, we would listen to him speak and think, we want him to tell this, like, I hope he'll be willing to speak in the film and be the person that you can navigate this very difficult material alongside. So that's how he became the voice in the film. He was very resistant to that initially. He did not want to make it about himself. And as journalists, I'm sure you guys understand the dilemma in that you really don't want to make it focused on you, but at the same time, it became a way that felt appropriate to tell this story in particular, because he's from Ukraine, because he was invited into those hospital rooms to keep filming, and then yes, he has a way with words. So
amazing way.
So not a bad voice either. So
great voice. You constructed the film around both his efforts to get the story out, but also how his reporting fed the reporting of every other outlet in the world. Can you talk about your choice to do, I don't know if it was you or Rainey who came up with that?
Yeah, I mean, actually, so first of all, this is a collaboration with the Associated Press.
Yes.
So one thing that was really important to them, this is just stated to us as the people who are working with them at a senior level, was they really wanted people to understand what the AP does. And in fact, we learned that like 50% of the world sees AP stories every day. We didn't even know that, right? So we're filmmakers, but we were thinking of what is the kind of conceit or the concept behind that. And Michelle and Mstyslav and myself too, we talked a lot about the inside-outside feeling of it. So this idea that they were on the inside, they didn't know the impact of their work even, because they were cut off, right? But you see that tension and drama of him trying to find a signal. And again, to Michelle's point, it really becomes his story because of his efforts to get the word out. That's when I was convinced that he should be the voice of the film, even though he was yet to be convinced, right? Is that he was the one with his two colleagues really trying to tell this story to all of us who were outside seeing things like the maternity ward moment. He worked so hard for us to see that it felt important to include that in the film, and the best way to do that is to show that.
Did AP come to you? Did you go to AP? How did this partnership come about?
I went to the AP.
Okay.
But Michelle and I have talked a lot about this, but I started to see footage coming out of Mariupol, and we didn't know who Mstyslav Chernov was at the time, but we definitely, I definitely saw there was a different compositional quality to his work, especially as Mariupol was going on. And we can talk about Mstislav's ongoing process there and becoming a filmmaker in the field, but I called the AP, we work with them, and I just said, if there is a film, if they get out, we would love to work with them on a documentary. We'd made For Sama. And then I met Mstyslav, and he had just gotten out. He was I believe he was in Kharkiv at the time, and it was over Zoom. And he just said, oh my God, I want to make a documentary. And I couldn't believe it because he was a news person to me in my mind. But then he expressed, no, I wanted to make a film and there's more. And so that was how it started. And then I thought, Michelle, she's the best collaborator I know and an amazing editor.
So talk about that process of a journalist becoming a documentary filmmaker.
Well,
and I'll come back to you.
Yeah,
I get it. I had an animation.
Well, I think Michelle mentioned that he's a novelist too. So he's a person who naturally thinks in long form. So you either have that ability, like that desire to tell a longer form story. So if you're already thinking about narrative arcs and you're thinking about the seminal quality of a moment, like a moment they decided to stay, I think he was already starting to think like a documentarian. He just never had made a documentary. And so that's where Michelle came in, and really that collaboration was the key to that.
You want to talk about that, Michelle?
Sure. I mean, it was a really unique experience. I mean, if you think about the context in which he was making this film, it was still happening. I mean, it is still happening. It was still within the first few months of the war. And so at the same time that we're talking about what he saw in Mariupol and how to construct a story with that footage, he was continuing to work in the field and going to places like Bucha and covering what had also happened there, but actually hadn't been documented in quite the same way because no one was there to cover it in the same way that they were in Mariupol. And that was a really specific decision that he made early on. And that's the value of having journalists who are from the communities that are in the middle of the conflict. They know where to go. And so he knew that Mariupol would be the place where this would play out. And he wasn't the only one who knew. There were many journalists there at the beginning, and they proceeded to leave. And that team decided to stay. And that's why we have this footage. That's why we have this coverage of potential war crimes that will always exist. And I think that was also incredible about it is that he was dispatching these stories in real time, as you saw. So he is figuring out, editing, cutting them, putting, like, if you can think about
the 10-second,
all of the things that you're thinking about in the field to just do your job. And at the same time, he's trying to survive. And so he's doing that and putting them out into the world in real time. And so then at that point, we knew it also gave us a little time to think in the long form model, contextualize like what you do see in those news dispatches, that gave us a chance to take a little time to think about how to construct the longer narrative, which to your question about become like a journalist, becoming a documentarian, I think he he has said, and I agree with it, that he thinks of films and documentaries as being sort of like the first book, that like a book that's written about a historical event, that it has like staying power in a way potentially that daily news won't necessarily get. And he does both. So he's speaking as somebody who does daily news and regular quick reporting and sees the value of that, but then also has an interest in how do we tell the story of our time and how do I be a part of that.
This is, sorry, just going to add on, some of the conversations that I've had with Mstyslav was actually a question that I've asked him during one of Q&As was, how did you find a way to balance all the hats that you're wearing from A, being a journalist, and that comes with a certain, standards, rules, and then B, being a documentarian where you're a filmmaker, you want to tell a compelling story that gets the audiences, the arcs and everything, and then Ukrainian who's watching his own home be burnt in flames. And so I think he does such a fantastic job here balancing those sort of standards, and where he's not really, his narration invites you into sort of like when you're facing terror, you actually get to see how he's processing what he's seeing, but at the same time he's not telling you how to think or who is the wrong guy. He's just placing facts as facts, being a journalist, and then obviously crafting with Michelle the whole arc of the story of the 20 days. And I know that he wishes that he would have stayed longer than 20 days. I think something that he talks about during his Q&As consistently is the regret that the team couldn't capture what happened to the theater, because some of the people that you've seen on screen, even the maternity hospital, they went into the hiding to the theater, and then it got leveled to the ground. And then there was nobody there to document that. So, we only have those snippets, but not the full story. So,
he makes mention at the end of the film that he feels some sense of guilt and regret over leaving the story. And one of the things I wonder about, I know we talk about a lot within the school, was sort of the self-care involved in trying to do these kinds of stories and remain sane yourself. I can't imagine that being in the edit room and going through what the raw footage was, both of you, and I know you're a mom. Are you a mom? No. Not yet? Okay. Mom?
Single.
Okay.
I'm a mom, June. I'm the mom.
You're the mom, which is why we
Love
see
moms.
through the frame of women and children so often in here. And I lost the thought.
Well, I'll just mention one thing, because my boy is 17, and so he was 16 at the time. So I think each one of us, each moment will affect you differently. And I think the thing with Mstyslav was, he's talked a lot about this, because this has been a question we've been asked, and he just says he finds solace in his work. And actually, I do too. And I think that is the thing, is like, if you feel your work is going to have staying power, it's not that you don't also want to get help, right, at times, but if your work feels like it could have the impact of staying with people, of being a document, of being one of, in this case, the only document of what happened there, then he talks about how helpful, even though he has so much guilt about not staying longer. So the stories that have not been told, which inspires us all to keep telling stories.
Yeah, I'll also say, as an editor, and I should probably distinguish for this crowd, it's like a video, like the film editor, cutting the footage, not a news editor. You're exposed to imagery of war if you work in and you work consistently on films that are about really difficult subject matter. And you're exposed to people grieving, which are sometimes harder to watch than even the more visually disturbing films in and of themselves. Some of those like the graphic, very, very graphic footage that he filmed, rarely, he didn't point his camera at things that, like, he wasn't thinking a lot about composition and how you were looking at something. But part of logging the footage, which you do starting the editing process, you watch all of those 40 hours all the way through, and you're making notes, and you could feel him composing the shots to try to get it so that you were understanding the devastation, but also in a way that had like care brought to it. And I will say the process of editing meant that I watched all of the hours, but also one thing that we have talked about at Frontline and also have had the opportunity to do, and I think you guys might have resources here too for, are through the DART Center for Trauma and Journalism. And this idea that you have people who are thinking actually right now about how journalists who are exposed to secondhand trauma are talking to people who are going through traumatic moments. There are tools and things that you can do. So if you're an editor, you can set your screen to black and white. You can turn the sound down when you don't have to listen to the same sound over and over again. The crying. My poor husband was like, I don't know what you're working on downstairs. He knew what I was working on, but he heard the cries. And so even for him, I was thinking about the offering that sort of like respect for his own exposure to it too, right? And so just being mindful of what you become, what you're exposing yourself to a lot.
Can I just add one thing? The DART Center has been incredible with our filmmakers, our whole staff. We've now done like at least 3 or 4 sessions with them. So if you're working with really traumatic footage, or you're going to places, or you're really alarmed by the news, which why wouldn't you be if you're a human right now? They're incredible, and they have done, I just have to say, like as a person who runs Frontline, I'm so grateful to them, because we don't have that skill set to help our journalists and filmmakers, and they literally have given us real tools to get through these moments in a little bit more healthy way.
Pauline, are you still in touch with Mstyslav? I mean, have you been in touch recently with Mstyslav?
Yeah, every time he's in New York City, I try to go and catch him during his Q&As.
How's he doing?
I mean, as soon as he's done doing Q&As, he's back home doing his job, reporting, and back to the front lines, which is, I don't know, it's actually really funny, because I think when I first met him at Sundance, and this is a little story that I said, it's just like I went to the premiere and I saw the Q&A, but then I met this man holding a cup of coffee and speaking with such a soft-spoken voice, and I couldn't put the 2 and 2 together that was the man who was behind something heart-wrenching as this story. But that speaks to his character, as you know, after witnessing so much and having the difficult job and the territory that comes from being a war reporter. But he is an inspiration to me and a lot of filmmakers like myself to, keep going. Our war is not over. We're not in the headlines because apparently our air science is not clickbaity enough. But that happens. That's media. It's the cycles. But that's why we have to keep going back. We have to keep telling the stories that are happening back home. I mean, it's just our job. We just can't stop, which is also walking the fine line of how do you take care of yourself during this period? But the motivation is that until the day our victory comes, we just got to keep going.
Since you raised the question of not being in the headlines anymore, it's impossible to watch this film and not think about what is going on in Gaza right now. And I want, Rainey, do you have a crew on the ground in Gaza? Is there going to be?
Well, I appreciate the question. I understand the question. And we do have 3 projects right now underway. And I think the most important thing for Frontline right now, we have a really big film that's going to come out in December, is context and nuance through this story. And we're all working day and night. We're really tired. We're really committed to it. So we actually have 3 films coming out in the next 3 months. And then we have a longer form project that is underway. It's very dangerous right now. As Azmat talked about, multiple journalists have been killed. And she'll know the number, but it is really horrifying what's happening to journalists
34
there.
as of 2 days ago.
34 I didn't check today. So
40.
we're
40.
We're really cognizant of safety first for our journalists. So we're working with the team right now. They had to come out. And so that's also, part of my job is safety protocol. And so yes, we will be covering all of this.
just thinking where to go now that I have opened that door.
I think
Why?
that it's just telling. It's also.
I was going to go ahead. You can tell it. What I'm going to say is, why is it? These films are so grim to watch. Why is it so important for us to do these films?
I mean,
it's hard to watch people dying on screen, and children dying, and mothers crying and dying. Yeah.
I think, and this is obviously a conversation I've had with the Ukrainian community. There's something about this, and this comes with any documentary that documents such full of terror events, but because we were talking about how at first we were seeing snippets, the 5 seconds, the 10 seconds, the picture from Malaletka, then it's like we get those whatever we could get, the little short stories, but behind them, what this documentary does, it just opens up that whole universe that that photo or those 5 seconds were part of. And I think what every Ukrainian went through while watching this documentary is that it kind of was like re-exposure to that, to the first shock of seeing those photos of those 5 seconds. But in a way, it didn't deter us from coming again and gathering our community again. And like there's something about what you all also have experienced here emotionally, because you saw something super raw and super unfiltered. But the reason why we have to keep making documentaries like this is because, frankly, news reports do their job immediately to report on what's happening, but we need to know that all those statistics that we see in the media, behind each statistic is a human being, is a human life. And we need to know their arcs, we need to know where they are now, and that's why this type of work is incredibly important, because also documentarians are one of the best historians. So in order for us, I mean, frankly, I'm pretty tired to say, like, learn to never again, but, that's why you need stories like this to continue talking and showing how the world is interconnected. The feelings that you feel out of watching the war that's happening in Ukraine, every single person who comes from a country that has ever faced war and conflict can feel those feelings, can feel the fear and anger.
Okay, I want to open the floor to questions. As Dean Cobb often says, a question ends with a question mark. It usually has an inflection at the end of the statement. It is not a statement, it is a question. It is short. If you get up there and start making a statement, I'm going to cut you off. So make sure you have a question and not a long platitude. Thank you. Go ahead.
Sorry. Hi, I'm Kira. I'm a documentary student here. I wonder, as an editor, can you talk a little bit about the moment, how you chose to weave in the moment of the baby being born and waiting to hear its first cry? Because I think that was very impactful, and I would just love to hear about your creative process on that moment.
So that was all Mstyslav. As much as this is, he is somebody who was telling stories. I mean, the day he was born, I'm sure. But he told me about that. Where did you go? Hi. Okay. I was like, where'd she go? No, it's okay. You can sit down. I just wanted to see where you were. That was one of the stories he told us as he was thinking about the scenes that he had gathered. And he said, there's this birth that happens, and I just kept filming, and we didn't know what would happen, and everybody in the room was just, their breath was being held. And he said, I don't know if it comes through in the footage, but this is what happened. And sure enough, it does, especially after you've seen so much before it and you're anticipating the worst. And so then when there was that first cry, you identify with the relief of everybody else in the room. So that was his experience of it, and so we cut it that way.
Thank you so much for this searing, heart-wrenching documentary. I ask you this question with a lot of pain. Throughout the documentary, we see such a clear editorial line in all the news clips we watch and the documentary itself. that attacking civilians and hospitals are reprehensible war crimes, right? But right now, halfway across the world, in Gaza, like Professor Cross mentioned, there's similar war crimes happening, children killed, hospitals targeted. But the editorial conviction has been—
Question, please. What's the question?
The editorial conviction in the media has been missing. Why do the same publications, and I'm not speaking about PBS here, but across the media at large, why do the same publications who can condemn one with such moral clarity, one struggle with such moral clarity, struggle to condemn the other? And how can journalists do better? How can newsrooms do better?
Are you talking specifically about the AP?
Not about the AP, not about PBS, but in general, as editors, as veteran editors, when you see newsrooms struggling to condemn one the same way they condemn the other.
Got you. Okay, so I think the documentary that you just saw, this is months after Mariupol. So just speaking for Frontline, like, please judge our work as it comes out, and you can tell me how you feel. I think you're going to be reassured that it's fair. And you can look at our work on our website just to see a film called Shattered Dreams of Peace. Go and look at that film because it's 2 hours, but it'll give you a sense of the tone that we're going to be taking. And as for the Associated Press, I can't speak for them, but I do know from talking to the editors that they're working very hard and they're publishing everything that they can every single day, every minute. So everyone on the journalism side is working very hard.
I didn't mean the AP all.
No, don't worry. I mean,
It's
I
okay.
understand the question.
This is like a third rail right now. We all understand,
it's
and it's just
okay.
very difficult to get cameras
Yeah,
on.
but I think it's important to
It's
talk about.
It's a very important question.
And I think it's valid to talk about, and I think it's an important question to ask. So thank you.
Hello, I'm Chloe. I'm one of the documentary students here too. I really enjoyed is a weird word to say for the film, but I really appreciated it, I guess is a good way to say it. So I was wondering, one of the parts of the film that I found really interesting and also important was including the part about how the Russian media outlets and the Russian governments were trying to claim that the scenes that we all saw from the AP were faked. So I wanted to know if you guys could go into more detail about how you chose to include it, include that part of the story, and if there was any parts you had to cut about that, or if you wanted to add more.
Yeah, that's actually a good reason why Mstyslav was the person who ended up being telling the story as well, is because they became part of the events that took place, and they were so telling. And in fact, as we were meeting him, AP was, to me at least, you knew where he was. I didn't know where he was. I was talking to him on Zoom in an undisclosed location somewhere because they were really concerned about his safety. There were journalists, as we all know, who were killed in Ukraine at the beginning of the war. And also there was a filmmaker who was trying to get out of Mariupol around the same time that he left, and he did not get out. And so putting that detail and that impact of their work in the story felt like a way to demonstrate the power of the journalism that they were making and they were sharing, and also a way that it was being challenged, but also the way that they were being personally sought.
I mean, I just think one of the biggest things that we're all facing, I'm assuming some of you are journalists, is the information war right now, and who is actually telling the truth, right? And this runs through all of our work. And one thing I'll say about working with the AP is every single thing that you see, we have vetted together. There's no amplified bombs. Like, everything there is real. And to the big question about why does it matter that we do this work, we're not the government. We're the only people on the ground documenting things independently. And I just really think we need to keep showing how dis and misinformation is used. And we do this in a lot of frontline films, like 1,000 Cuts. And we keep doing this because we want to show how these information, literally, information wars are defining our times. It's something that we all care so deeply about at Frontline.
That's definitely something that Ukraine has been fighting with Russia for a long time. I mean, take, for example, the MH17 catastrophe and how that has been flipped and flopped on Russian media. And so like using all these snippets that they were, like AP was putting out, but we have to show what the Russian media is portraying, because just to see how the propaganda machine is working to twist the stories and put the blame back on Ukrainians.
And also, just in pure storytelling terms, it raises the stakes for Mstyslav to get this material. Where you placed it in the film, all of a sudden raises the stakes for him to get the material out. I know this session was open to some of the film school students. Do I have any film people in here? Okay, go ahead. I know Rainey has to leave. It is 8:30. Do you want to say farewell?
I think
Do you
you're
wanna
all
take
wonderful to be here. Thank you very much. I'm so sorry I have to leave, but I have to take the last plane out of New York tonight. But thank you for coming and for being here and staying through the Q&A. And June, who is also a director for Frontline 2, knows me very well. So if you ever want to reach me, she can get to me. Okay. Good night, everyone.
Thank you.
Take care. Good night. Safe travels.
Okay, thank you.
Bye-bye. Okay, question.
Hi, I'm Carla. I'm also a doc student, and I'm very shaken up by this film. I guess that was the entire point. And I realized because of this that images like this, we tend to go numb to them if you see them a lot on the news, and it becomes more of a thing that you kind of see and you don't really react very emotionally to anymore at some point. At least I feel like that's what's happening to a lot of people. So I'm wondering, especially as someone involved in the making of a project like this, how do you, I don't know, and see, I don't even know how to ask my question now, but like, how do you decide what do we put in, how much graphic detail do we put in? I saw sometimes you blurred certain images. How do you
make those choices?
Pardon?
How do you make those choices?
How do you make those choices? How do you know what might be too much for people to see when you see it every single hour of the day editing? I guess that's my question.
So Mstyslav had these conversations with the editors that he was working with in real time. And he was very insistent that he did not want war to be sanitized. And I think there are moments in the film where that's represented. He says, warning, graphic content, this is difficult, but it must be difficult to watch. And I think that is something that we kept in mind as we were cutting. But also another thing that's interesting about the film, the very few blurs that are added are of what were in moments where it felt like there was like the kind of wound that just you would blur that, right? And that was with Irina, the pregnant woman who was taken out of the hospital after it was in the maternity ward after it was bombed. So a few instances like that we blur because that it crosses that line, but actually the film is so painful to me, more so when you're witnessing the grief and suffering of the parents. And that's actually something that you don't have the time in a regular news cycle to let play out and sit with. And there's no blurring that. That's just letting that, being witness to that. And so we made decisions with those ideas in mind, not wanting to over sanitize and wanting it to feel as respectful, but also as clear as we could. And that I think it was also made a difference. I said this earlier, but he is somebody who could tell the story in a way that no one else could. I don't think I would have felt the same about editing it that way if it wasn't someone like him who was behind the camera, who was thinking deeply about the impact of what you were going to see and what he wanted to share.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Hi. Yes, very similar question actually. Linking back to that question of impact, is there, it's very hard to watch, which could also mean that fewer people actually watch it. So is that a consideration that goes into this decision making?
You would think that people would. I was really afraid before the Sundance premiere because we did not know how people would react to this film, and as it turned out, it like every screening was full. The anticipation for the film was very high, and the reception of it was very warm, both with Ukrainians in the audience, who this was a very different story to witness. There was, and also with Americans and the other people who were in the audience as well. There were screenings where, there was one screening where we didn't realize until we were doing a conversation like this after the film that someone stood up and told us that she is from Mariupol and her sister and family was there when this started. And they've actually really, in screenings like that and going forward, there's been a lot of community built around being, like, knowing that the story is being told. So reception within that world is, they've embraced it. At the same time, it has been embraced, I think, by people who are not from that community, because they're seeing war in a way that we don't usually see. And while it's challenging, many people know going in that it will be. And it hasn't kept people from being interested in and attending. It won the audience award at Sundance. So,
Paulina, can you speak a little bit to the reception in the Ukrainian community?
Absolutely. I mean, so my work through Razom, like I do, I joined with PBS teams to help them with the impact and reach various communities from organizations like ours, which Ukrainian organizations or activist leaders throughout the U.S. And again, you would think that something as raw as this documentary would deter people away, but in fact, we've connected the PBS team with like over 20 different organizations throughout the United States to just do local screenings there, and that's the Ukrainians, but we're all consistently urging them to bring their American friends and to come and watch this documentary. And the thing is like the theaters are consistently filled. I think maybe like even from my personal experience, like the reason why I decided to watch this is because, again, there's like familiarity of like, I've seen these images before. I want to see what's the full story behind them, no matter how painful it is. And it's just, that's the power of the documentary that just like keeps people coming back to it again. And in fact, I mean, every single Ukrainian comes out crying, but it's such a, such a cathartic feeling, because it's the power of this documentary, you know. And it's like, frankly, and I told this to Mstyslav, this is one of the films that's going to go down in history, because just like we said, it's like war has not been documented in such a way. So yeah, I think it creates the buzz, but it's the curiosity aspect, because you do get to see the story behind all those images.
We are technically out of time. I don't know, Kate, can I take 2 more questions, or shall I wrap it? Okay.
Hi, I wonder how did you handle the trauma of the victims? Like, I guess when the war is happening, it's chaotic, like you have a balance of like want to like the world to see what's happening, but also like the trauma of the people. So like, did he ask for permission for this trauma to be like exposed, or how does it work?
Yeah, so when they were in the field, they were following the same practices that Associated Press journalists follow anytime they're covering conflict. And those are pretty distinct. So things like wearing very clear press insignia, not filming anybody who tells you not to film them, but also doing good journalism in the field and reporting on who is it that I filmed, what is their name, how do we, and then what he did a lot of, as he was continuing to report on what was happening in the country in those initial months, they were also, Vasilisa was a big part of this, the other, the field producer on the project who was there with him the whole time. They were going back and finding where did everyone go? So they know where these families are. They are talking to the doctors and the nurses who are in the hospital. In fact, there's a satellite hospital, a Mariupol hospital in Kyiv right now in the hopes that someday they'll be able to go back to Mariupol and start working from there again. So in the interest of good journalism, they've gone to find these families. And yeah, that's just a part of the work.
Last question.
Okay, last question. Hopefully this one's a good one to wrap up on as well. You've talked a bit about the motivation of why everybody on this panel does this work, and you also talked about some real specifics about putting your screen in black and white or muting the sound. But when you're working on stories like this, how do you look after yourself? How do you know when to call it a day? How do you know when to take a break? How do you make this a sustainable career so that you can keep doing this kind of work going forward?
It's hard.
It's so hard.
My joking answer to this has always been the 4-Scotch cure. Always worked for me. But go ahead.
Well, that is one way.
Not recommended, by the way.
Do love Scotch. But so I have the privilege of having a therapist and access to healthcare that allows me to have one. I wish everyone did. I wish it was a part of I wish it was part of preventative medicine. I have sought out resources. I mentioned DART, but I understand your question, like beyond that. And it's hard. And I think it, just like the rest of life, like sometimes things feel like balance. I've heard people say balance isn't something that you seek necessarily every single day, but maybe if you can think of it like on scale, if you're working toward that, that might be a more realistic goal. And so I don't beat myself up every day when it wasn't a balanced day. Like I didn't do all the things that I had plotted out and meant to do. But that on scale, if I can figure out how to do that. Does that make sense? Like, is that kind of getting
Do you ever have those days where it's just too much and you have to walk away?
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
And you have
Yeah.
to.
And you just let yourself do that?
Yeah, for sure. And also being a part of a team helps that happen. And so on projects where, I mean, I'm working on something right now that's also really difficult. And I will say it's harder because it doesn't have someone like Mstyslav behind it.
That's what I was thinking. You don't have a Mstyslav.
We don't have a Mstyslav on it. And just someone who has like the clarity of like, this is a story that I am situated to tell this way, you know? So, and when you're working with a topic that is difficult, and the footage itself is difficult, and you find yourself, you're like, I'm thinking about story structure, and this was like someone's life. Like it's just you find yourself in those moments. Absolutely, I think you find ways to step away from it, and I think on that. So to answer on that project, we put more. We have another editor on it because I just can't do it all. So it's collaborations. It's looking for people you trust and people that you can work with and help each other. And one thing I'll say too that I have just noticed in the past few years, and I feel so grateful for, is the appreciation people have for our personal lives. Like I really do, I sincerely feel that way. Like anytime someone on our team says, I have a doctor's appointment, everyone's like, of course, absolutely. This deadline for this film I'm on right now got extended because we frankly needed more time. And I was like, I booked a trip to see my brother smack in the middle of our finishing schedule. And Rainey was like, you are going. You are not canceling that. So there is a real sense right now, and I hope it lasts. I don't know what it's a consequence of.
It's not like that when I was at
No, and so the 4-Scotch rule was what happened. But no, this is something I truly do see this. And if you don't see it in the places you're working,
about having Rainey at the
don't stay there.
But again, also like there's nothing wrong about stepping away, and like specifically speaking, like with the nonprofit work that we're doing, where it's like from full scale invasion, it's like go consistently, but you hit burnout, and then if you're not helping yourself, how can you help others? And like, don't get me wrong, guilt is there consistently when I'm not on like reading the news or whatnot. But it's other than that, like how can I be helpful if I don't take care of myself?
Thank you very much. And
Thank you
both for staying. Thank all of you for staying.
And thank you all for coming, and I hope that you urge your friends and your communities to come up and see the screening, because as you have experienced, it's like no other. And we're so lucky to have this film exist. So.
And to have yours. Thank you for screening it tonight.